Salam, my name is Aufan Nahami and I am the Yemen country manager for Saferworld. We work in partnership with civil society organizations and community groups in Yemen and around the world to help reduce the impacts of conflict, to build solutions to the challenges communities face, and to build the foundations for sustainable peace. We sat down with some of Saferwood's partners in Yemen to discuss the situation in Taiz and Aden and the dynamics of the conflict in those cities and across the country, the challenges facing civil society organizations and communities, but also we look towards the future and where hope may be found. This podcast episode was originally recorded in Yemen in Arabic. We have translated the episode into English and re-recorded the conversation with members of Saferworld's Middle East and North Africa office so that you can hear the perspective of Yemeni peacebuilders and be part of the discussion. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our guest here in the studio and greetings to our listeners. I am Aufan Naami from Saferworld, a peacebuilding organization that works in Yemen. Joining us in the studio are some of our Saferworld's partners. Let's start with our guests. Miss Bahia, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Bahia Sakaf, Executive Director of BAS Foundation in Yemen.
Welcome. And Muad?
Thank you, Alpha. I am Muad Al-Soufi from Nodes Yemen in Taiz Governorate. Hello.
And from Nodes, we have Khalid.
Yes, I'm Khalid Al-Shamiri from Taiz Governorate, also from North Yemen.
Welcome. And with us also our ever-smiling brother, Mr. Muayyad. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Greetings and God bless you all. I am Muayyad Nasir from YBODS, Youth Without Borders from Taz.
All of you are working with local Yemeni organizations, and as you mentioned in the introduction, you work in Taiz and in Aden. For listeners who might not be aware of the details of the conflict in Yemen, and also given the dynamics might change from one place to another in Yemen, can you talk to us about the conflict in your regions? How are you experiencing it as part of your work?
Well, I can start first. I will speak about the situation in Taiz. Of course, the armed conflict is still ongoing in Yemen, and Taiz is part of that conflict. The conflict is entering its 8th year now, and likewise it is ongoing in Taiz. For 7 years, Taiz has been suffering from the miseries of war. Taiz has also been suffering from an imposed siege that has blocked most of the city's entry and exit points. Transportation and freedom of movement are lacking. And that is why Taiz is particularly heavily impacted by the ongoing armed conflict in Yemen. It is suffering from many problems that have seriously affected the governorate. First of all, the siege has limited civilians' ability to move, and it has caused problems with the transportation of goods. It has been especially difficult for the injured, for people with chronic illnesses. Lots of people have suffered greatly. The blockade has also affected our work as civil society organizations. It has restricted our freedom of movement, even for the type of humanitarian assistance that our organizations want to deliver to regions within the governorate or outside. It also impacts our ability to do certain work that requires us to move freely from one area to another. This really affects us within civil society a lot. I mean, if we wanted to organize some activities involving people from different regions in the city or the governorate, their transportation would be difficult. Because of the many checkpoints, Taiz is divided into two parts. One part is under the control of one of the conflict parties, the Sana'a government and Ansarullah, and another part of Taiz is under the control of the internationally recognized government. This particularly has impacted the work of civil society organizations in their ability to move freely between the two parts of the governorate. There are also many other problems. The community is divided. There's an internal identity divide because of the conflict. The conflict impacted our community's relations and caused a divide within the community. It caused conflict over resources and mainly, for example, over water. We have this problem in Taiz where 80% of water sources are in the areas under the control of Ansarullah's government in the Hoban area outside the city. And just 20% of water sources are inside the city. And that is why, because of the conflict, the source of water is unavailable to be pumped to the city, and it is causing a huge problem. There are many conflicts within the city over water and over water sources, and there are interventions from many civil society organizations that are responding to this issue.
Thank you, Muad. Muayyad, how does the picture drawn by Muad impact young people and the issues that they're facing at Youth Without Borders organization?
Well, I agree with Muad in his assessment of the situation, specifically for TAS and in Yemen in general. But that specifically. We normally say wars inevitably have impacts on communities, and this is what we saw for all segments of society, including young people. What happened, in my opinion, is that the process of development within communities had halted, and this process has been harnessing the energies of and potential of young people. What is happening now is the opposite. Young people energies and capacities are being invested as a fuel for the war, and this is really painful, and one of the biggest problems. We also suffer with the problem that the future culture that youth are exposed to during the period or stage of the conflict, I mean, the hate speech, will need many years to deal with this. As an organization working with youth, we saw many rights for young people that should have been realized or secured are now rarely talked about. And many of these rights that were set forth as a result of the national dialogue process have stopped entirely, especially those for women and young people. These are many important issues that all civil society organizations and even international ones are facing. We as Youth Without Borders are suffering a lot on this front, either security-wise, on the community level, and on all levels.
Thank you, Mayad. So, Bahia, is your experience of the situation different in Aden?
Yes, Will. We lived through 7 years of war now since its first broke out until the liberation of Aden. Aden, you can imagine, is a declared capital of two states. A semi-existing state is the Yemeni Republic and the Southern Arab State. The two authorities exist in the city, both are in conflict within the city. Even the efforts to unite the two authorities under what is known as a presidential council have unfortunately resulted in conflict. Even though it gives us hope as a local Yemen civil society community living in a governorate and inclusive of various segments from other Yemeni governorates, this glimpse of hope that inspired us during the reunifications of various fighting factions within the city that has been suffering of 7 years. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a disappointment of our hopes. The Presidential Council is threatened with failure. Conflict between parts of the Presidential Council are still ongoing. The security formations are still trying to find common interests. Unfortunately, this impacts local communities existing in the city. We're a city with no services that cannot be considered a capital to any state or entity. With civil service cuts, the city's resources are stolen by powerful conflict actors, both domestic and foreign, that we do not know much about. This city is practically forgotten, a capital, but forgetting capital amidst this overall conflict in the Yemen Republic.
It saddens us all to know the situation is going the way it is. Khalid, we have heard about the current situation of young people and about the situation in general. I'm wondering, how does the conflict impact your work at NODS, both as an organization and as employees working in these organizations?
As organizations, we face these problems in two ways. First, citizens living in the governorate of Taz, suffering from siege and extreme absence of services like water and electricity, or weak services like security and others. And also as employees in civil society organizations. And since we are trying ourselves or as entities contribute to the solution to these problems and challenges, we end up finding ourselves exposed as workers in civil society organizations to death possibly, as my colleagues explained earlier. Just moving from one region to another could be life-threatening. And especially when we carry out social or humanitarian activities, the lack of security could lead to abductions or attacks. And this is why we deal with these problems in two ways, as mentioned earlier. In spite of all this, and because of our love to our nation and our city Taz, we try as hard as possible to provide solutions to these problems. We provide humanitarian assistance, or by working with communities on issues like resilience, sustainability, societal coexistence. We seek to find solutions to problems and conflicts that exist in our community. And this is why we work on this side, that of NGOs, with our utmost maximum capacity to alleviate the suffering of citizens.
Thanks, Khalid. Coming over to you, Bahia. As a woman leading a feminist organization in Yemen, is your role different? Are there other problems that you face that are unique from those faced by other Yemeni organizations?
The situation is the same. We are all suffering our work under these conditions and instability. Stay absent, it all affects our work. But as a feminist organization and as a feminist activist working on women's issue in the community, the risk is compounded for us. What hinders our work as a woman is the increase in attacks, unfortunately, between the different sides of the conflicts in the country, and this is in turn reflected on the society and on the societal awareness and collective conscience in the local communities we work in. The rise of religious rhetoric against the work of women, against feminist organizations that supports women issue on the pretext of wanting to strip the community of its traditional value and religion. And this rhetoric unfortunately always pops up whenever the armed conflict gets worse and reaches a critical point in the country. We are no different than other organizations and other governorates. We suffer from the same problem. But as my colleague said, our work is still ongoing. We remain standing by our country because, in my opinion, it needs helping hand, and we want to be. Actually, we will be the helping hand.
Thanks, Bahia. Coming back to you, Moyed, are youth organizations such as YPOD finding enough support from the international community? Is your work being welcomed by the community, by young people themselves?
Well, in regards to support, of course, there is support from the international community. But as organizations specialized in peace building, if you compare them with the support that given to other organizations working in a humanitarian sector, the support is very weak. It does not compare. So what I mean to say is we need more focus and support to such organizations working on peace building and with youth. As for our reception with young people, they are very welcoming and engaging, especially during this phase where opportunities for youth are closed. Young people seeking development, seeking understanding, whether they find just a bit of attention or an avenue for development. We notice that they are quick to or extremely excited for such activities.
Okay, thanks, Moyed. Now, a question for everyone. How does your work relate to your vision for peace? And how does this vision relate to border trends when it comes to the surrounding political climate?
In our organization at Nods and Ties, and for many other organizations as well in many governorates, we are adopting a vision, especially in the last period after 7 years of war. A vision of how to build peace from the communal sense of the term, to start from the society, from small local communities. And as I mentioned before, because of the existing conflict or existing disputes in Taiz city specifically, and in Taiz governorate largely, the experience is similar to that of Yemen in general, but with more pronounced and specific effects within Taiz. The conflict has led to many societal divisions. It also created many internal conflicts within the community, either for resources or through conflicts over values, over politics, just to name a few. That is why our actions within NODS and within Tai's general civil society, the organizations working on peace building specifically, are rooted from a strategic vision that we must start from the grassroots to reach the higher levels in peace building, meaning that we take it step by step, starting from local communities. In cases, sometimes we need to intervene to provide some resources or address some needs to alleviate the intensity of conflicts and calm the tensions within local communities. Our vision is to build social cohesion and to foster coexistence. We foster peacefulness within local communities to use as a stepping stone to reach higher levels of peace building. Many workers usually work on internal local mediations because it also affects the issue of relative stability within the small local community. So we hold local mediations between tribes in rural areas and in different areas between opposing sides, either based on religious values, for example, or due to political differences, or even conflicts over resources and other kinds of conflicts. These activities have a significant effect on peace building. So we start from a vision that if we want to achieve a real, lasting, inclusive, and comprehensive peace process across Yemen, we should start by building the base the correct way. After 8 years of war, we have witnessed many negotiations, from Stockholm to Kuwait, the recent ceasefire negotiations, with the last one in Amman, for example. But in the end, we still find that the comprehensive peace is complicated to achieve. or at least that there are many challenges on its path. Whereas on the local levels, we see local mediators are perhaps better able to reach faster and larger successes. So I believe we should start from this base, this local base.
Thanks for starting, Muad. How about you, Bahia? Do you want to comment on this?
I do not disagree much with what my colleague Muad has said. For our organization, PAS Association, we are working along with the same path and the same method. We also believe that a pace starts from the grassroots. And after 2050, the general cohesion of Yemen societies was hit. Societal cohesion in Yemen was shredded and fragmented. We were divided internally and not only on a nationalist level, but also along a sectarian line and even geographically within one region. We are fragmented and divided, unfortunately. Working to bridge the gap that exists in the society is a very important task because we believe that an inclusive peace eventually will come, wherein sides will reconcile and reach an agreement when and where their interests intersect. When they find a common point of their interest, they will reach an agreement, but society is directly affected by this war. Therefore, our work within civil society is focused on this space. We try to bridge the gap in local communities, the divides between people. From one governor to the second, we build bridge of coexistence between both sides. To meet up, to unite the social fabric that was fragmented, I think that through this approach we will build a better community, one capable of reaching comprehensive peace within the general framework.
I see many faces agreeing with you, Bahia. Muayyad Khalid, has your perspective on peace changed throughout recent years and experiences? What has changed for you?
Well, yes, it is normal that there are many changes. And as you mentioned, because of the accumulated experiences since we entered the war 8 years ago, or rather now that we are in the eighth year, this added a lot to those working on peace building on the local level and even for the normal citizen. In the first few years, we were not the same on the same level of awareness of conflict happening around us that we are at today. Maybe we were reactionary, instantaneous, or unprepared, contrary to what we can notice now we are. I think more aware. We are more aware of what is happening, and therefore our projects and interventions are built uh, um, on or towards that, which means that we are rooted in the foundation that understands requirements, that understands the larger context. These changes are positive. They will contribute to changing the reality in Yemen and also ensure a better future. Currently, we are working on, as mentioned by Bahia, bridging the gap between communities and repairing or maintaining the societal fabric, while at the same time working to prevent any further fragmentation that could happen in the coming years.
And in addition to what Moyed said, among the changes that we start focusing on is for women and young people to play an influential role in the peace building process, because they are the most significant victims of this conflict. And that is why part of the changes we started with was to train and equip women and youth to play a mediatory role, to play a more major role in raising the needs of their community and advocating these needs to warring sides of the conflict and to international delegations. Therefore, and based on this, we focus on what is, in our experience, the most important variable, enhancing the important role of Yemeni youth and women in peace building.
Thank you both. And so, what support can the international community provide organizations like yours and to peace building efforts? Are there certain things that you want to get more of, or certain ways of working you do not want to see again?
Countries participating in Yemen could sometimes play a positive role and many other times play a negative role. Unfortunately, personally, and as a Yemeni citizen of this country, I believe wholeheartedly that the situation for this country will be from within. Whenever the side of the conflict are convinced that they must meet for the sake of this country, then there will be a breakthrough. Because in the end, countries involved in this matter are working for their own interests, in the interest of their position within regional and local international power balance, and they will put their interests first before the interests of our people. And as such, we should push for this direction. This is my opinion, is that we should push for Yemen's solution. And as for the involvement of organization, not governments, international organizations supporting the path of a peace process for Yemen, I think that, as Muayyad pointed out, they have a role to play. But unfortunately, the package of support directed to peace building and peace organization is really weak compared to the fund given to the Institute of Word. Supports giving to organization working on peace is very small, unfortunately. We hope the international community double the efforts on this front to turn the page on Yemen's need for humanitarian assistance and relief. We really want this humanitarian organization to turn this page. We do not mostly need in Yemen now food baskets as much as we need sustainable development that helps lay the foundation for solid peace in this country. I think this will be a good role for the international community to play.
I wholeheartedly agree with our Bahiya's words. And at the same time, I would like to stress that to install peace in Yemeni society, is the first step to economic stability. Before the war, we did not need much aid assistance, even though the economic situation was bad, but it was not that bad. I think international organizations or international donors should focus their efforts on peace-building projects and strengthening peace in Yemen. This is what will help us reach a breakthrough in having economic stability, and we will not need food baskets or any other humanitarian assistance.
Personally, I think the international community should have faith. They should have faith in the importance of the role and the efforts played by local civil society organizations and to empower them in a real sense. I mean, they must believe in their efforts, and their role should be real and have a realistic weight in the balance of power, not just cosmetic or, let's just say, a partial or a secondary role. At the moment, I think they are focusing more on the opposing sides of the conflict and mainly on the influential actors in the conflict more than they actually focus on local communities and on representatives of local communities such as civil society organizations. From our experiences over the past few years, there were many incidents where local communal efforts from organizations or associations, or even just ordinary people, had a much bigger impact than official negotiations. For example, regarding the release of those detained, those imprisoned, or held in jails of each side of the conflict, local efforts were able to release many of those detained, much more than the international efforts could, and those efforts are still held back by negotiations or just put on a shelf. Those international efforts were not able to release many detainees from different sides of the conflict, probably because they were dependent on certain arrangements or agreements or just politics of each side of the conflict. And in other cases, sometimes opening roads between governorates or even allowing for humanitarian access corridors for some civilians. Local mediators and local efforts and local civil society organizations have perhaps been able to achieve much better success than the different sides of the conflict, the ones that are engaging with the track one or higher level tracks. And this is why I think the international community should really believe in the actions and the ability of local civil society organizations' efforts. That really trying to enable them to be capable of providing and empowering them to be able to provide those efforts. I mean, for example, with the whole discussion on localization in general, whether it's in the humanitarian domain or the development or peace building domain, local organizations really should be empowered and genuinely empowered, not just superficial or simple support to those organizations. I believe the international community can help us on that front and other fronts as well, in terms of building the capacity of local civil society organizations or empowering small local communities or local organizations that are just starting up or that are working on a small scale, helping to give them and helping to give a larger representation with many segments of society. These organizations should also have a voice and a role in the peace building process.
We hear this opinion more and more these days, that we should end this non-alignment stance and start with a process of positive alignment towards values of justice, democracy, and peace building. What do you think about that? Do you agree with these opinions?
Personally, I think yes. We should break free from our narrow minded identities and look toward the wider issue facing Yemen as a whole. We all identify with the Yemen first, that is the path to establish a strong status capable of moving or progressing forward.
Could also admit that non-alignment is considered, or I consider it to be a form of alignment in and of itself. Because silence is an admission of acceptance of our reality that we live in. But we have to take a step forward or to reject reality that could be negative. Or even on the scale of a simple stances, it has an impact, it will have an impact in the big picture.
In addition to this, positive alignment will play a big role in putting an end to the conflict. And the less the conflict is prolonged, the easier it will be to treat its symptoms. Hence, taking an unaligned position could lead to prolonging the conflict, and as mentioned by Moayed, has a negative effect and will prolong the conflict and will also cause difficult repercussions that will need a lot of effort and capabilities to deal with later.
I think the subject of non-alignment is extremely difficult. I mean, even when a large group of countries formed a non-aligned alliance and so forth, they were accused by many of these countries that their non-alignment was difficult. Or at least, I mean, that their non-alignment is difficult because in the end, people do favor some beliefs and ideologies. So it's really difficult to say that you are 100% non-aligned. I mean, human nature will eventually sway to one side or the other. But as much as possible, we should deal with issues with a sense of justice, or rather that there should be a clear position on specific topics. For example, there should be a clear position on the end of the conflict and also a clear indication of stances. Let me give an example with the latest ceasefire in Yemen. In the last ceasefire, of course, it is known that the UN envoy's perspective is that of complete non alignment, and he is supposedly dealing with all sides of the conflict with 100% impartiality. However, for example, during negotiations in the last ceasefire talks, it happens that one side could break the ceasefire agreement. And for example, of course, all sides commit breaches to the ceasefire. What I mean to say is that indicators on the ground say that there are breaches from this side and breaches from that side, and it's very hard to maintain impartiality 100%. So the last envoy in the latest sessions in the Security Council had to declare frankly that one side of the conflict refused the proposals to consolidate the ceasefire relating to opening roads, opening humanitarian corridors, and this is obvious. So I think it is very hard to remain impartial in all positions, even if you were a UN negotiator. I mean, between two sides of any given conflict, you will have to eventually specify the obstacles in your path. You will have to, at some point, condemn one side over the other. And this is why I think it is hard to remain impartial 100% of the time right across the board. However, even in peacebuilding, we should also name and specify important details and say this is the problem here, or this is who is causing the difficulty or challenge there, even if it counts for one side of the conflict against the other. But this remains important to proceed in the peace process so we could all live in peace.
Well, allow me to try and ask a personal question to all of you. What drives you to continue your work? Where do you get your hope for peace from?
From Yemen. Our country deserves it. We deserve it because there is no more beautiful country. We see it like this. Everything in it is wrong and tiring. There are things that bothering us as a citizen, but it's nothing. We should differentiate between two things. It's not that the country is annoying us. We are annoying the country. As citizens in it, we have exhausted it. Our country deserves for future generations to hand it over to them a good country. So they would not curse us. I mean, those who would come after us should, should get his homeland is their right, and we inherited from our forefathers, and it was rightfully ours. But unfortunately, we are giving up on it. We should work now on getting back our hope in taking back our country. This is what drives us to stay and work.
In addition to this, I think that the hope we see in the eyes of the young people we work with is also among the great things we see. The change in the behavior of the young people we notice while working on activities or some projects. This is our fuel and probably will lead us to the next step that we really should do this again. Second, if it was not us, then who would it be? This point also we have to focus on or believe in that our role must be done. And the best that could perform this role is us. We should be the ones playing this role.
To add to what my colleague has said, I too get my hope from history. History teaches us that nothing is forever, that this war, no matter how long it lasts, will end one day. And we will have the honor of contributing to ending this war It also fuels our determination for this work. We also take our hope from children's eyes, that we hope and wish and strive to provide them a better environment and situation than what we have lived through.
I think we have two choices, either die or hold on to life. So the hope we get to keep going is from our will to hold on to life. In the end, we live in this country. We are Yemenis and this is our country. So we have two choices, either die and reach the point of desperation, give up and the situation escalates and things get even worse, or hold on to life, onto a promise of development, and be a brick on the path, or I mean a step forward onto that path. What pushes us more too is that we feel we have achieved something tangible on the ground, seeing these accomplishments that we've seen. I honestly think that without the many civil society organizations and the efforts being put, things would have been much worse than they are right now. I mean, if someone could one day conduct a study or a statistic on the number of young people, women, and just people in general working in civil society activities, either in local youth initiatives or community initiatives, just to see how many organizations have sprung up and emerged since the start of the war. All of them, all of these people were faced with two choices: either be a fuel for the war and ignite more war and conflict, and the situation would deteriorate further, or being a brick in rebuilding, mitigating the conflict and its intensity. We also have this hope that guides us. We chose this team and we chose this path to hold on to life more and to hold on to hope even more. Successes on the ground and seeing how people benefit from them, we feel that we want to build more peace, build more social cohesion, and try even more to mitigate the impacts of conflicts and reduce their intensity. This, in and of itself, is an unimaginable source of hope. I believe that every smile we put on a child's face, bringing them back their innocence and vitality, is 1,000 times better than doing something else or contributing more to this conflict.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope our listeners enjoyed our discussions as much as I did. I wish for everyone to keep Yemen present in their hearts and pray for workers in this incredibly difficult task. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thanks to the studios of Bandar Aden for their wonderful hospitality. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.